Christmas Eve. A night meant for family, for warmth, for laughter around the table. But not for me. That night, the people I loved most looked me in the eye and said I wasn't welcome. At first, the shame crushed me. I felt like a ghost in my own story, erased from a tradition I had built for decades. But as the night went on, my pain turned into resolve. If they thought they could erase me, they had no idea what I was capable of. So the next day, I made a decision that would change Christmas for everyone, and leave my family stunned in front of the whole community. My name is Christian Whitman. I'm 72 years old. And today, I'll show you how betrayal at the holiday table turned into dignity, justice, and a lesson they'll never forget. Before I share the full story, I just ask one thing. Hit that subscribe button and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to that Christmas Eve, the night my own family told me I wasn't welcome. December 23rd started like any other winter morning in Millbrook, Connecticut. Snow dusted the colonial houses along Elm Street, and the smell of wood smoke from chimneys mixed with the crisp air that reminded me of my childhood Christmases. I was up at 500 hours. Old military habits die hard. Brewing coffee in the kitchen of the house where I'd hosted Christmas for 40 years. 40 years. Let that sink in for a moment. The dining room table that could seat 16. The china cabinet filled with my late wife Sarah's holiday dishes. The Christmas tree I'd already set up in the corner, waiting to be surrounded by family laughter. Everything was ready, like it had been every year since 1984. But something felt different this year. The phone calls from my children had been distant, short, clinical. "Yeah, Dad, we'll be there." No excitement, no questions about the menu or whether they should bring anything special. Just obligation disguised as duty. I should have seen the signs. See, I'm Christian Whitman, 72 years old, United States. Army retired after 30 years of service. 2 tours in Vietnam, 1 in Desert Storm, and more peacekeeping missions than I care to count. I came home with a chest full of ribbons, a Purple Heart, and the discipline that helped me build Whitman Construction from a single pickup truck into a company that employed 47 families in this county. But more than any medal or business success, I was proud of one thing: being the dad who never missed a Christmas, the father who made sure every holiday was perfect, every birthday remembered, every graduation celebrated. When Sarah died 8 years ago, I made a promise at her graveside. "I'll keep the family together, sweetheart, no matter what it takes." That promise cost me nearly everything I had. My son David, 48, married to Rebecca, a woman who spoke in Instagram captions and measured success by square footage. My daughter Jennifer, 45, whose husband Marcus had the handshake of a car salesman and the ethics to match. Both couples lived in houses I'd helped finance, drove cars I'd co-signed for, sent their kids to private schools on my dime. I wasn't just dad. I was the ATM that never said no. Every year, I'd created what I called the Christmas Family Fund, $50,000 set aside specifically for holiday celebrations. Decorations, food, presents, travel expenses for everyone to come home. I wanted my grandchildren to have the magical Christmases that my own kids remembered, the kind where money was never a worry and love was the only currency that mattered. But lately, that love felt like a one-way transaction. The call came at 18:47 hours on December 23rd. David's voice, nervous but determined. "Dad, we need to talk about tomorrow." I set down my coffee. Something in his tone made my chest tighten. "What about tomorrow, son?" "Well, Rebecca and I have been talking, and Jennifer and Marcus too. We've decided to do Christmas a little differently this year. Differently. In my experience, when family says they want to do things differently, what they really mean is without you. What kind of differently? A pause. Too long. We're going to have Christmas at Jennifer's house. But Dad, we think it might be better if you didn't come this year. The words hit me like artillery fire. Direct, devastating, no warning. Excuse me? It's nothing personal, Dad. It's just, well, you know how you get. All those war stories, the political, and comments, the way you always take over the conversation. Rebecca's parents are coming, and Marcus's business partners. We want to make a good impression. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. A good impression? You understand, right? You're just, well, you're from a different generation. Sometimes the things you say, the way you think, it doesn't really fit with the image we're trying to project. Image. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. So I'm not welcome at Christmas because I'm an embarrassment? Dad, don't make this harder than it has to be. We'll come visit you the day after, okay? We can exchange gifts then. It'll be nice and quiet. Just family. Just family, as if I weren't. A family. As if the man who'd raised them, supported them, loved them unconditionally for decades, had somehow become too much of a burden for their perfect holiday tableau. I see, I said quietly. And this decision? Everyone agreed to this? It's really for the best, Dad. Trust me. Trust. Another word that would never sound the same. I hung up without saying goodbye. For the next hour, I sat in my recliner, the same chair where I'd read bedtime stories to David and Jennifer 30 years ago, and tried to process what had just happened. My own children had exiled me from Christmas. Not because I was sick, not because I was difficult, but because I was an inconvenience to their social aspirations. The house felt different now, quieter. The Christmas tree lights seemed dimmer. The stockings hanging on the mantel looked like artifacts from someone else's life. But then something else started happening. Call it military instincts, call it simple curiosity. But I found myself thinking like a strategist instead of a victim. If my children were so concerned about appearances, so focused on impressing Rebecca's parents and Marcus's business partners, then they were planning something significant, something that required my absence. I opened my laptop and did what any good intelligence officer would do. Reconnaissance. Jennifer's Facebook page lit up my screen like a Christmas tree. Photos from earlier that day, expensive wine bottles, gourmet food spread across marble countertops, professional flowers arranged with museum-quality precision. The captions told the story. Getting ready for our most elegant Christmas yet, and can't wait to host the perfect holiday gathering. Perfect. There was that word again, but here's what caught my attention. The scale of it. This wasn't a simple family dinner. Jennifer had hired caterers, professional photographers, a string quartet. The comments section was filled with responses from the local elite, the country club crowd, the yacht club members, the people who'd never given my daughter a second glance when she was growing up in my modest colonial. I scrolled through more posts, my anger building with each click. Marcus had shared photos of the Christmas decorations, spared no expense for family traditions. David posted pictures of the custom gift bags, each one personalized for our special guests. Our special guests. I wasn't even important enough to be mentioned. But then I saw something that made my blood run cold. A post from Rebecca, uploaded just 3 hours ago. So grateful to finally have the budget for the Christmas we always dreamed of. Christmas goals. Family first. Blessed life. The budget, the Christmas family fund, my $50,000. They weren't just excluding me from Christmas. They were using my money to throw a party specifically designed to prove they were better off without me. I closed the laptop and walked to my safe. Inside, beneath the deed to my house and my military service records, was a thick folder labeled Family Financial Records. 5 years of bank statements showing automatic transfers to my children, house down payments, car loans, education funds for the grandchildren, emergency medical expenses, vacation funds. $1.7 million over 5 years. I'd given them everything they needed to build their perfect lives, and now they were using that foundation to construct a Christmas celebration that didn't include the man who made it all possible. But as I sat there in my quiet house, surrounded by 40 years of Christmas memories, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, sharp and raw, but underneath it something else was growing. Not revenge, that was too simple, too small, something bigger. If my children wanted a Christmas that would impress their high society friends, if they wanted an event that would be remembered and talked about for years to come, then I was going to give them exactly that, just not the way they expected. I picked up my phone and started making calls. But not to my children. Not anymore. Time to show them what a real Christmas miracle looked like. You know, there's something about being cast aside that clarifies the mind. Suddenly you see things you'd been too blind to notice before. Patterns, behaviors, the slow erosion of respect disguised as modern family dynamics. As I sat in my study that night, surrounded by photo albums and military commendations, I started remembering the Christmases that built the tradition my children had just destroyed. Christmas 1984. Jennifer was 6, David was 9. We'd just bought this house on Elm Street, a modest colonial that Sarah fell in love with because of the bay window in the dining room. Perfect for watching snowfall during Christmas dinner, she'd said, her eyes bright with dreams of future holidays. That first Christmas was magical, not because we had money, we didn't, but because we had purpose. I'd just started Whitman construction with a beat-up Ford pickup and more determination than sense. Sarah worked part-time at the elementary school to help make ends meet. But Christmas morning, you'd never know we were stretching every dollar. I built Jennifer a dollhouse with my own hands, working in the garage after she went to bed. Sarah sewed tiny curtains for the windows and painted miniature furniture. David got a wooden train set that took me 6 weeks of evenings to complete, not because we couldn't afford store-bought toys, but because handmade meant something more. It meant time, attention, love you could hold in your hands. "Daddy, did Santa make this just for me?" Jennifer had asked, running her small fingers along the dollhouse walls. "Santa had some help," I'd told her, winking at Sarah, "but it was made especially for you, sweetheart, just for you." That was Christmas. Not the decorations or the food or the presents themselves, but the knowledge that someone cared enough to create something beautiful just for you. By 1990, Whitman Construction was thriving. I'd landed the contract to build the new municipal center, and suddenly we had more money than we'd ever dreamed of. But the Christmas traditions didn't change. They just got bigger, richer, more elaborate. The dining room table stretched to seat extended family. The Christmas tree grew from 6 feet to 12. The presents multiplied, but they were still chosen with care. Sarah and I would spend hours discussing what each person needed, wanted, dreamed about. Christmas morning was an orchestrated symphony of joy, with me as the conductor and Sarah as my co-composer. "This is what I want them to remember," Sarah had told me one Christmas Eve as we watched David and Jennifer arrange cookies for Santa. "Not the house or the cars or any of that. This feeling. That home is where people celebrate you, not just tolerate you. Celebrate you, not just tolerate you." Her words echoed in my mind as I flipped through photo after photo of Christmas mornings. Somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being celebrated and started being tolerated. When did that happen? Maybe it was when Jennifer married Marcus in 2010. He was charming enough with his marketing degree and his ambitious plans, but there was something calculating in the way he looked at our family assets. During their engagement, he'd asked more questions about my business than about my daughter's happiness. "Mr. Whitman, have you considered diversifying your investment portfolio? I have some contacts in commercial real estate that might interest you." Even at the wedding reception, he was networking, using my family connections to build his own career. I should have seen it then, the way he catalogued relationships like a salesman inventorying prospects. David's marriage to Rebecca in 2012 brought a different kind of distance. Rebecca came from old Connecticut money, the kind of family that had been wealthy for so long they'd forgotten what earning it felt like. She tolerated my military background as quaint, my construction business as blue-collar respectable, but never quite suitable for her social circle. "David, perhaps your father could wear the navy suit to the country club dinner," she'd suggest, as if my wardrobe choices were a public relations concern rather than personal preference. Gradually, Christmas began changing. The handmade touches disappeared, replaced by professionally decorated trees and catered meals. The intimate family moments gave way to photo opportunities for social media. The conversations shifted from sharing memories to discussing acquisitions. Who bought what, who traveled where, who was climbing which social ladder, and I went along with it because I loved them, because I wanted them to be happy. Because Sarah's dying words had been, "Promise me you'll keep the family together, Christian. Promise me you won't let them drift apart." So I kept writing checks, kept funding the increasingly expensive celebrations, kept pretending I didn't notice that my role had shifted from beloved patriarch to convenient benefactor. The Christmas Family Fund started in 2018, the year after Sarah died. $50,000 annually, deposited into a joint account that Jennifer managed. "To take the financial stress out of the holidays," I'd explained, "so we can focus on what really matters, being together." But being together, I was learning, had conditions I'd never imagined. Last Christmas had been the warning shot I'd ignored. Jennifer's new house in the affluent Riverside district, with its professional kitchen and great room designed for entertaining. The guest list had expanded beyond family to include Marcus's business partners and Rebecca's country club friends. I'd found myself relegated to a corner chair, watching strangers eat food purchased with my money while my own children networked through the party I was funding. "Dad, could you keep the war stories to a minimum tonight?" Jennifer had whispered during cocktails. "Marcus is trying to close a deal with the Hendersons, and they're very sensitive about military topics. Sensitive about military topics. As if my service to this country was something embarrassing, something that needed to be hidden away, like a family secret. But I'd stayed quiet, smiled politely, played the role of the harmless grandfather who was grateful just to be included. Never again. The phone call that exiled me from this year's Christmas had actually done me a favor. It had stripped away the pretense, the polite fiction that I was still the head of this family. I wasn't. I was the funding source for people who had learned to love my money more than they respected my presence. But here's what David and Jennifer had forgotten in their rush to embrace their new social status. I hadn't built Whitman Construction by accepting defeat. I hadn't survived Vietnam by giving up when the situation looked hopeless. I hadn't raised 2 children as a single father for 6 months while Sarah battled cancer by rolling over and playing dead. I was Christian Whitman, United States Army, retired. And if my children wanted to play games with family traditions, they were about to learn that their old man knew a few strategies they'd never encountered. The Christmas they thought they were planning without me. It was about to become the most memorable Christmas of their lives, for all the wrong reasons. The next morning, December 24th, Christmas Eve, I woke up with the clarity that only comes from having your illusions stripped away. No more pretending, no more hoping things would go back to the way they used to be. My children had made their choice, and now I was free to make mine. But first, I needed intelligence. In the Army, we called it battlefield reconnaissance. In civilian life, it's called social media stalking. Either way, the principle is the same. Know your enemy's position before you make your move. I poured my coffee and opened my laptop. What I found exceeded even my cynical expectations. Jennifer's Instagram story from 6 a.m., Christmas Eve prep day. So excited to host our most elegant celebration yet. Christmas goals, Jack hosting life. The photos that followed were a masterclass in affluent excess. Cases of Dom Perignon champagne stacked in her kitchen. A florist's truck unloading arrangements that probably cost more than most people's rent. A catering van with Millbrook Elite Events emblazoned on the side. Elite Events, the most expensive catering company in 3 counties. The kind of service that charged by the moment of impressed silence they could generate. But it was Marcus's LinkedIn post that really caught my attention. Grateful to host several prominent local business leaders for a private Christmas celebration. Sometimes the most meaningful connections happen around the dinner table. Networking, business development, relationships, networking, business development. He was using Christmas, my Christmas tradition, funded by my money, as a corporate event, a chance to schmooze potential clients and investors in an intimate, family-friendly setting that would make him appear successful, established, connected, everything except honest. Rebecca's Facebook check-in at the Riverside Country Club. Spa told its own story. Pre-party pampering with the girls. Tonight is going to be perfect. Self-care, Christmas Eve, and country club life. David had shared a photo of custom-printed menus on expensive cardstock. Christmas Eve dinner, a celebration of family, friends, and new traditions. Each menu was calligraphed by, and probably costing $50 a piece just for the lettering, new traditions. As if 40 years of Whitman family Christmas traditions had been nothing more than a rough draft, waiting for them to perfect it. But here's what really twisted the knife. Every single expense they were bragging about was being charged to the Christmas Family Fund, my Christmas Family Fund. I could track it all through our shared account. $3,200 for catering, $800 for flowers, $100 for champagne, $450 for custom menus, $600 for the photographer they'd hired to document their perfect evening. They weren't just excluding me, they were using my money to throw a party specifically designed to prove they were better off without me. The guest list, helpfully posted by Rebecca in a private Facebook group that she'd forgotten included me, was enlightening. The Hendersons, Marcus's potential business partners. The Washingtons, Rebecca's parents' social circle. Dr. Patricia Elms, Jennifer's cosmetic surgeon. James Morton, David's investment advisor. Not one person on that list had been to our previous Christmas celebrations. These weren't family friends, they were networking targets. People my children wanted to impress, convince, seduce into their orbit of influence, and I, the man who'd funded every step of their social climbing, was too embarrassing to be seen by these new contacts. I closed the laptop and walked to my safe. Time to review the full scope of my investments in their ungrateful lives. The documents painted a clear picture. David's house on Prospect Hill, $850,000, with a $300,000 down payment, courtesy of Dad. Monthly mortgage assistance for the first 3 years, $186,000. Jennifer's Riverside mansion, $1.2 million with a $400,000 down payment and ongoing emergency funds totaling $220,000. Cars, vacations, children's private school tuition, medical expenses, business startup costs for Marcus's consulting firm, Rebecca's boutique that failed after 18 months, all of it documented in cancelled checks and bank transfers. $1.7 million over 5 years, more money than most people earn in a lifetime, handed over with love and trust to children who now considered me a social liability. But as I reviewed those numbers, a different kind of calculation began forming in my mind. If Marcus was using tonight's dinner to network with potential business partners, if Rebecca was treating it as a social debut, if Jennifer was positioning herself as the new matriarch of Millbrook society, then reputation mattered to them more than anything else, which meant they had something to lose. I picked up my phone and called Tom Bradley, my attorney for the past 15 years. Tom had handled Sarah's estate, the business contracts for Whitman Construction, and every major legal decision I'd made since retirement. Merry Christmas Eve, Christian. What can I do for you? Tom, I need some advice about family financial arrangements. Specifically, what happens when adult children use jointly held accounts for purposes other than what was agreed upon. A pause. Tom had been practicing law long enough to recognize when a question wasn't theoretical. Christian, is everything all right with David and Jennifer? Let's just say I'm reconsidering some of my more generous financial arrangements. The Christmas Family Fund, for instance, can I close that account unilaterally? If you're the primary account holder, which I believe you are, then yes. Though I'd recommend documentation of any unauthorized uses before you take action. Unauthorized uses, like throwing a $10,000 party to celebrate how much better Christmas was without the man funding it. What about other financial ties? Co-signed. Loans? Ongoing support arrangements? Christian, what exactly are you planning? I looked out my window at the grey December sky. Somewhere across town, my children were putting the finishing touches on their perfect Christmas celebration, the one I wasn't good enough to attend. I'm planning to give my children exactly what they've asked for, Tom. Complete independence. From their embarrassing old father. After I hung up, I called my bank. Linda Morrison, the branch manager, had handled my accounts for over a decade. Mr. Whitman, how lovely to hear from you on Christmas Eve. What can I help you with? Linda, I need to review all joint accounts with my children and any automatic transfers scheduled for the next 12 months. The list was longer than I'd realized. Monthly support payments to both households. Automatic loan payments for their mortgages, standing transfers for the grandchildren's education funds, even subscriptions to country club memberships and insurance policies I'd been covering without thinking about it. I'd like to suspend all automatic transfers effective immediately and close the Christmas Family Fund account. Transfer the remaining balance to my personal checking. Sir, that's quite a significant change. Are you sure you want to implement this on Christmas Eve? Linda, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. By 3 p.m., I'd systematically dismantled 5 years of financial generosity. Every automatic payment stopped. Every joint account closed. Every co-signed obligation reviewed with my attorney for legal exit strategies. But that was just the defensive strategy. The real question was, what came next? I made myself a sandwich and sat at my kitchen table. The same table where Sarah and I had planned every Christmas for 4 decades. The house felt different now. Quieter, yes, but also cleaner. Like a weight had been lifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't worried about making other people happy. I wasn't calculating how much someone else's dreams would cost me. I wasn't measuring my worth by how generously I could provide for people who had stopped appreciating the provision. I was free, and that freedom was about to become very expensive for the people who thought they could discard me like last year's Christmas decorations. My phone buzzed. A text from Jennifer. Dad, the caterers are asking about final headcount. You're definitely not coming tonight, right? Need to confirm for seating arrangements. Even now, even after cutting me out of their celebration, she wanted confirmation. That I'd stay quietly at home while they celebrated with my money. I typed back, "Don't worry about me, sweetheart. I have my own plans for tonight." Her response came within minutes. "What plans? Dad, you're not going to do something weird, are you?" Something weird, like expecting to be included in my own family's Christmas tradition. Nothing weird, Jennifer. Just spending Christmas Eve the way I want to spend it. Have a wonderful party. I turned off my phone and walked to my study. Time to make some calls of my own. Time to plan a Christmas that would be remembered long after their catered dinner was forgotten. If they wanted to show their new friends what the Whitman family was really about, I was going to give them a demonstration they'd never forget. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been excluded by family during the holidays? What would you have done in Christian's position? That evening, as the sun set on Christmas Eve, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years. Sitting in complete silence. No television, no music, no distractions. Just me, a glass of Sarah's favorite wine, and the crushing weight of what my family had become. The house felt like a mausoleum. Every Christmas decoration I'd put up now seemed to mock me. The stockings hanging over the fireplace, including ones for David and Jennifer that would remain empty tonight. The dining room table set for 16 people who would never come. The Christmas tree standing guard over wrapped presents that would go unopened. I walked through each room slowly, like a general surveying a battlefield after defeat. But the strange thing was, I didn't feel defeated. I felt awake. Clarity, as a way of washing over you when illusions die. In the living room, I stopped at the photo wall. 40 years of Christmas mornings captured in silver frames. There was David, at age 5, gap-toothed and grinning as he held up a toy soldier I'd bought at Woolworths. Jennifer, at 7, hugging the teddy bear Sarah had sewn by hand because store-bought toys didn't have enough love in them. When had their smiles become so calculated? When had Christmas morning shifted from joy to performance? I found the answer in the more recent photos. 2019, David holding up an expensive watch I'd given him, but his eyes were already looking past the camera, toward other presents. 2020, Jennifer posing with her designer handbag, the thank you hug lasting exactly long enough for Rebecca to snap the photo. 2021, the grandchildren opening tablets and gaming systems, their attention immediately absorbed by screens instead of the moment. The progression was clear once you knew to look for it. Christmas had evolved from celebration to transaction, from family bonding to gift acquisition, from gratitude to expectation. And I had funded every step of that devolution. Poured another glass of wine and walked to Sarah's reading chair by the bay window. This was where she'd spent her last Christmas. Too weak from chemotherapy to do much more than watch the chaos of family celebrations swirl around her. "They're getting spoiled, Christian," she'd whispered to me during that final Christmas morning. "All this abundance, it's changing them. They're starting to expect miracles instead of appreciating them." I'd brushed off her concerns then. "They're young, sweetheart. They'll learn gratitude when they have families of their own." But Sarah had seen what I'd been too blind to notice. "When you give people everything they want," she'd said, her voice barely audible over the noise of wrapping paper and excited voices, "they stop wanting anything except more." Now, sitting in her chair on the Christmas Eve that should have been our 41st together, I finally understood what she'd been trying to tell me. My phone, which I'd turned back on to monitor the evening's developments, buzzed with notifications. Every few minutes, Instagram stories from tonight's celebration flooded my screen like reports from enemy territory. 6:47 p.m., Jennifer's story. "Guests are arriving. Everyone looks absolutely stunning." The photo showed Marcus greeting a distinguished older couple at the front door. The Hendersons, presumably. Behind them, Rebecca was air-kissing, a woman in diamonds who could only be described as Connecticut money personified. 15 p.m., Rebecca's story. "The table looks like something from a magazine. Our photographer is capturing every detail." And it did look magazine perfect. Crystal glasses caught the light from elaborate candelabras. China place settings gleamed against cream-colored linens. Fresh orchids in December because roses were apparently too common, created centerpieces that probably cost more than most people's entire Christmas budget. 33 p.m. Marcus's story. Honored to share Christmas Eve with some of the most influential families in Connecticut. Grateful, new traditions, business family. The hashtags told the real story. This wasn't Christmas. This was a business event disguised as a family tradition, a networking opportunity wrapped in holiday sentiment. But it was David's post at 7:52 p.m. that really twisted the knife. Sometimes, the most meaningful Christmas celebrations happen when you're surrounded by people who truly understand your values. Tonight feels like the beginning of something beautiful. Family first, new beginnings, Christmas Eve perfection, people who truly understand your values. The implication was crystal clear. I was not one of those people. The father who'd raised them, supported them, loved them unconditionally for decades, had values that were incompatible with their meaningful celebration. I set the phone aside and walked to my study, where Sarah's Bible still sat open to the bookmark she'd placed on her final Christmas morning. Psalm 27, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Sarah had always found comfort in Scripture during difficult times. "When people disappoint you, Christian," she used to say, "remember that disappointment is just love meeting reality. The love is still real, even if the reality hurts." Love meeting reality. That's exactly what was happening tonight. My love for David and Jennifer was as real as ever, but the reality of who they'd become, who I'd enabled them to become, was finally undeniable. I closed the Bible and opened my laptop. Time for some research of my own. The Riverside Homeless Shelter's website painted a sobering picture. 43 individuals currently housed in their temporary facility. Families separated by circumstance, veterans struggling with PTSD, elderly people who'd outlived their savings and their support systems. The Christmas Eve menu at the shelter, donated sandwiches, canned soup, and whatever desserts local churches had contributed. 43 people who would spend Christmas Eve grateful for basic sustenance, while my children served Dom Perignon to people who already had everything. I scrolled through the shelter's volunteer section. Their Christmas Eve volunteer coordinator was Father Miguel Santos from St. Andrew's Catholic Church, the same church where Sarah and I had been married 43 years ago. I picked up my phone and dialed the number listed on the website. "Father Santos, this is Christian Whitman. I know this is last minute, but I'd like to discuss a Christmas Eve donation to the shelter. Mr. Whitman, I remember you and Sarah from the parish. How wonderful to hear from you. What did you have in mind?" I looked around my empty house at the Christmas feast prepared for 16 people who would never come, at the wrapped presents under a tree that would stand sentinel over nothing but my own foolish hopes. "Father, how would you feel about bringing Christmas dinner to the shelter tonight? Not just donated food, but a real Christmas meal, complete with all the traditional fixings." "That would be incredible, but Mr. Whitman, the logistics alone. It's Christmas Eve, most catering companies are closed, and even if they weren't, the expense, Father, expense is not a concern. I have a house full of Christmas dinner that won't be needed here, and I have some ideas about how to make this more than just a meal." For the next 30 minutes, I outlined a plan that grew more ambitious with each detail. Not just dinner, but a complete Christmas Eve celebration. Real tablecloths instead of paper. Actual plates instead of disposable containers. Christmas carols, presents, the kind of holiday magic that money could buy, but that love made meaningful. "Mr. Whitman, this is incredibly generous, but it would require an army of volunteers to pull off something like this on Christmas Eve night. Father, let me make some calls. I think you'd be surprised how many people would be willing to help create a real Christmas miracle." After I hung up, I sat in my study for a long moment, Sarah's photo watching me from the bookshelf. For the first time since David's devastating phone call, I felt something other than hurt and anger. I felt purpose. My children wanted to celebrate Christmas with people who understood their values. Fine, I would celebrate Christmas with people who understood mine. While they networked with the wealthy and influential, I would feast with the forgotten and overlooked. While they took photographs to document their social success, I would create memories that might be the only bright spot in someone's Christmas story. While they pursued connections that could advance their careers, I would make connections that might advance someone's hope. The Christmas they'd stolen from me was about to become the Christmas I gave to people who truly needed it. But first, I had to make sure this evening would be remembered for all the right reasons. And that meant my children's perfect party was about to face some unexpected competition. Time to show them what real Christmas values looked like. Thank you for staying with this story. I promise you the best is yet to come, and what Christian does next will restore your faith in the true meaning of Christmas. Christmas Eve at 8:30 p.m. found me doing something I hadn't done in decades, making calls not to ask for favors, but to offer them. The first call went to Tom Bradley, my attorney and old friend. Christian, is everything all right? You sound different. Tom, remember when you told me about your son's struggles after he came back from Afghanistan? How hard it's been for him to find stable housing. Of course, Michael's been staying at the VA halfway house, but it's temporary. Why do you ask? How would he feel about spending Christmas Eve at a real dinner? Not charity, not pity, a genuine Christmas celebration where everyone is treated with dignity. Tom's silence stretched for several seconds. Christian, what are you planning? I'm planning to have the best Christmas of my life, Tom. And I'd like to invite Michael to join me. Within an hour, my contact list had become a recruitment tool for the most important mission of my civilian life. James Morrison from Morrison Concrete. His brother was a veteran living in transitional housing. Patricia Elms from the hardware store. Her elderly mother was spending Christmas alone at Millbrook Manor nursing home. Each call followed the same pattern. I'd explained that I was hosting a special Christmas Eve dinner for people who deserved celebration. And would they know anyone who might appreciate being treated like family for one night? The response was overwhelming, not just in terms of guests, but volunteers. When word spread that Christian Whitman was doing something extraordinary for Christmas Eve, people wanted to be part of it. Sarah Chen from the florist shop. Mr. Whitman, I have arrangements left over from today's orders. Beautiful ones. I'd love to donate them to your dinner. Mike Rodriguez from Rodriguez Catering. Christian, my crew is already cleaned up for the night, but for something like this, we'll come. Back, no charge. Father Santos called at 9:45 p.m. with an update that made my chest tighten with emotion. Christian, when word got around the shelter about tonight, people started asking if they could help, not just attend, but contribute. Mrs. Patterson has arthritis and can barely walk, but she's insisting on bringing her famous apple pie. Tommy Martinez, he's a veteran who's been homeless for 6 months. He wants to play Christmas carols on his guitar. This wasn't becoming charity, it was becoming community. But I had one more call to make, the most important one. Janet Holbrook had worked as my secretary at Whitman Construction for 18 years before retiring. More than an employee, she'd been Sarah's closest friend and the closest thing to a sister I'd ever had. Christian Whitman, you old fool, what are you doing calling me this late on Christmas Eve? Janet, I need a favor, a big one. Anything, honey. You know that. I need someone to document tonight. Professional photographs, but also I need someone who understands the importance of what's happening. Someone who knows how to tell a story. Janet had been a photographer before joining Whitman Construction. Her work had appeared in Connecticut Magazine and the Hartford Courant. More importantly, she had the eye of someone who could see the human story behind the event. What exactly are you documenting, Christian? I told her everything. The exclusion from my family's Christmas, the discovery of how they'd been using my money. And now, the Christmas Eve celebration I was creating for people who knew what it meant to be grateful. Oh, Christian, she said, her voice soft with understanding. Sarah would be so proud of you right now. I hope so, Janet. I really hope so. I'll be there in an hour with my equipment. And Christian, this isn't just going to be documented, this is going to be remembered. By 11 p.m., the transformation was complete. My dining room, which had been set for 16 ungrateful family members, now accommodated 22 people who understood that Christmas was about more than social positioning. The homeless shelter had provided a guest list that read like a catalogue of American resilience. Robert Chen, 68, Vietnam veteran with 3 Purple Hearts, currently living in his van behind the Walmart. Maria Santos, 34, single mother of 2, recently evicted after her ex-husband stopped paying child support. William Bill Patterson, 71, retired teacher whose medical bills had consumed his life savings. But these weren't statistics arriving at my door. They were guests, men and women who'd been given clothing vouchers from local churches, haircuts from volunteer stylists, and the kind of dignified treatment that transformed them from recipients of charity into participants in celebration. Robert Chen arrived wearing a donated suit that had been tailored to fit him perfectly. His handshake was firm, his posture military straight despite the circumstances that had brought him to this moment. Mr. Whitman, I understand you served in Vietnam. So did I, 1st Cavalry Division. A welcome home, brother, I said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with geography. Maria Santos entered with her 2 children, Sophia, 8, and Miguel, 6, dressed in outfits that made them look like they were attending a wedding rather than accepting charity, but their mother's eyes held the careful distance of someone who'd learned not to trust unexpected kindness. Mrs. Santos, I'm Christian. These must be Sophia and Miguel. I have grandchildren about your age. Thank you for inviting us, she said quietly. I need you to know we're not looking for handouts. We're just between situations right now. Ma'am, there are no handouts at this table, only neighbors sharing Christmas dinner. Nothing more, nothing less. Bill Patterson, the retired teacher, arrived with a worn leather portfolio under his arm. Mr. Whitman, I brought something for after dinner. If it's appropriate, I'd like to read a Christmas story to the children. It's something I wrote for my students before I had to stop teaching. Bill, this is your Christmas too. Whatever feels right to you feels right to me. As each guest arrived, the house filled with something it hadn't contained in years, genuine gratitude. Not the obligatory thank yous of people who expected gifts, but the deep appreciation of people who understood that tonight was extraordinary. Janet Holbrook moved through the gathering like a documentary filmmaker, capturing not just images, but moments. The way Robert Chen stood a little straighter when I introduced him as a fellow veteran and hero. The smile on Sophia's face when she saw the children's table set with actual crystal glasses instead of plastic cups. The tears in Bill Patterson's eyes when Father Santos blessed the meal and specifically mentioned each guest by name. But it was during dinner that the real magic happened. Conversations sparked across the table in ways that social protocol usually prevented. Robert and Bill discovered they'd both served in Vietnam, just 2 years apart. Maria and Mrs. Patterson from the nursing home bonded over the challenges of raising children in different eras, but with identical love. These weren't awkward interactions between different social classes. This was what Christmas dinner was supposed to be, a gathering of people who appreciated each other's presence more than each other's status. At 11:47 p.m., as we were finishing dessert, my phone buzzed with a notification that seemed to come from another universe. Jennifer's Instagram story. What an absolutely perfect Christmas Eve. So grateful for new traditions and meaningful connections. Christmas Eve bliss. New beginnings. I glanced at the image. My children and their guests raising champagne. Glasses in a toast, their smiles bright and their designer outfits impeccable. It looked exactly like what it was. A carefully curated performance designed to impress people they barely knew. Then I looked around my own dining room. Tommy Martinez was playing Silent Night on his guitar, while the children sang along softly. Janet was photographing Bill Patterson reading his Christmas story to Sophia and Miguel. Father Santos was deep in conversation with Robert Chen about their shared experiences in military service. No one was performing. No one was networking. No one was calculating the social value of their interactions. Everyone was simply being present, being grateful, being human. As I watched this scene unfold in my dining room, something shifted inside me. The hurt from my children's rejection was still there, but it was being overwhelmed by something much more powerful, the recognition that I was exactly where I was supposed to be, with exactly the people who belonged at my table. This wasn't revenge against my family. This was a reminder of who I really was and what Christmas really meant. But tomorrow, Christmas Day, the world was going to see the difference between these two celebrations. And my children were going to learn that their perfect party had been upstaged by something much more beautiful than they'd ever imagined. The real Christmas miracle was just beginning. Christmas morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of Connecticut winter day that makes everything look like a Norman Rockwell painting. But I woke up feeling something I hadn't experienced in years, complete peace with my choices. The evening before had ended around 1 a.m., with guests helping to clean dishes and pack leftover food to take with them. Not because I'd asked them to help, but because that's what family does. And that's what we'd become over the course of one evening, a chosen family bound by gratitude rather than genetics. Mr. Whitman, Tommy Martinez had said as he prepared to leave, "I want you to know something. I've been homeless for 8 months, lost my job, lost my apartment, lost my confidence. Tonight was the first time in 8 months that I felt like a human being instead of a problem." Tommy was 28 years old, a veteran of Iraq, with a Purple Heart and PTSD that made regular employment nearly impossible. But at my Christmas table, he'd been the musician who led us in carols, the storyteller who made the children laugh, the man whose gentle spirit reminded everyone that circumstances don't define character. "Tommy," I'd replied, "you've always been a human being. Tonight you were just in a place where people could see it clearly." Now, as I made my morning coffee, I reflected on the contrast between the two Christmas celebrations that had happened 12 miles apart in the same small Connecticut town. My phone had been buzzing since 6 a.m. with messages, but not from my children. Janet Holbrook had sent me the first batch of photographs from the evening, and they were breathtaking. Not because of professional lighting or expensive settings, but because they captured something real. There was Robert Chen, the homeless veteran, standing at attention as Father Santos blessed the meal. His posture was military perfect, his face dignified, his eyes bright with purpose. You'd never know from looking at him that he'd been sleeping in his van for 3 months. There was Maria Santos helping her children write thank you notes at the children's table, her face soft with the kind of maternal pride that comes from watching your kids experience joy instead of just demand it. There was Bill Patterson, the retired teacher whose medical bills had cost him his home, reading his Christmas story to an audience that hung on every word, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "Christian," Janet had texted with the photos, "these aren't just pictures. They're proof that magic still exists in this world." But Janet had done more than document the evening. As a retired journalist, she understood the power of storytelling. And she'd already begun sharing the story. At 7:15 a.m., she called me directly. "Christian, I hope you're sitting down. The story is spreading faster than I expected." "What story?" "The story of a man who chose compassion over bitterness." I sent a few photos and a brief write-up to my friend at the Hartford Courant last night. She couldn't sleep, so she put together a quick piece for their morning online edition. It's already been shared over 2,000 times. I opened my laptop and found the article, "Local Veteran Creates Christmas Miracle for Homeless Community." But it wasn't just a feel-good holiday story. It was a profile of what Christmas could be when it was about giving dignity instead of displaying wealth. The article included quotes from several guests, but Tommy Martinez's words were featured prominently. Mr. Whitman didn't just feed us. He treated us like family. He made us feel worthy of celebration, not just charity. That's the difference between kindness and love. By 8 a.m., the local CBS affiliate had picked up the story. By 9 a.m., it was trending on the Hartford Courant's Facebook page. By 10 a.m., I was getting calls from producers at Connecticut Public Radio and Channel 8 News, but it was the call at 10:47 a.m. that changed everything. "Mr. Whitman, this is Jessica Chen from Good Morning America. We'd like to feature your Christmas story on tomorrow's show. Would you be available for a phone interview this afternoon?" Good Morning America, national television. The story of last night's dinner was about to reach millions of people. "Ms. Chen, I appreciate the interest, but I want to be clear about something. This wasn't a publicity stunt. This was just Christmas dinner with people who needed to know they mattered." Mr. Whitman, that's exactly why America needs to hear this story. In a world where Christmas has become so commercialized, you've reminded people what the holiday is really supposed to be about. I agreed to the interview, but with conditions. Any story about the dinner had to focus on the guests, not on me. Tommy, Robert, Maria, Bill, they were the real story. Their resilience, their dignity, their capacity for joy despite difficult circumstances. At 11:30 a.m., as I was preparing notes for the Good Morning America interview, my phone rang. Jennifer's name appeared on the screen for the first time since her text asking about final headcount. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Her voice carried a combination of panic and fury that I'd never heard before. "Good morning, sweetheart. Merry Christmas. How was your party last night?" "Don't play dumb with me. Rebecca's been getting calls all morning from people asking about the homeless dinner you threw. Someone posted photos on Facebook and now everyone's talking about it. What were you thinking?" "I was thinking it was Christmas Eve, and I wanted to spend it with people who would appreciate the celebration." "Dad, do you have any idea how this makes us look? People are asking why we weren't at your dinner. They're asking what kind of children exclude their father from Christmas. Marcus is furious. This could affect his business relationships." There it was. Not concerned for my feelings or curiosity about why I'd chosen to spend Christmas with strangers. Just worry about how my actions affected their social standing. "Jennifer, I'm sorry if my Christmas dinner inconvenienced your networking strategy." "This isn't funny, Dad. David's been getting questions too. People want to know why you were hosting homeless people while we were having dinner with the Hendersons. It makes us look like we abandoned you." "Did you abandon me?" Silence. "Jennifer, let me ask you something. Last night, while you were impressing Marcus's business partners with Dom Perignon and professional photographers, did you think about me at all? Did it occur to you that I might be spending Christmas Eve alone? We thought you'd understand. We thought you'd want us to advance socially, to build better connections, at the cost of basic human decency. Dad, please, can you tell people that we invited you and you chose to do your charity thing instead? Can you make this less embarrassing for us?" I looked out my kitchen window at the bright Christmas morning, thinking about Tommy Martinez playing guitar for children who clapped with pure joy. About Robert Chen standing at attention during grace, honoring the moment with military precision. About Maria Santos crying with gratitude because someone had treated her family with respect. No, Jennifer, I won't lie to protect you from the consequences of your choices. Dad, but I will tell you what I told the Good Morning America producer an hour ago. This isn't about you. This is about what Christmas means and what happens when people choose love over status. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jennifer breathing heavily. "Good morning, America? Dad, what have you done?" What I'd done was remember who I was before I became their personal ATM. What I'd done was rediscover the difference between being needed and being used. What I'd done was choose dignity over desperation. I gave 22 people the best Christmas of their lives, sweetheart, and in the process I gave myself something I'd forgotten I needed. What's that? Self-respect. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and smiled for the first time in months. My children were about to learn that actions have consequences, and that public humiliation comes in many forms. But more importantly, America was about to see what Christmas looked like when it was about serving others instead of serving yourself. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is the moment. Because what happens next will restore your faith in the power of choosing love over revenge. Christmas afternoon brought a media circus I never could have anticipated. By 2 p.m., there were 3 news vans parked outside my house, and my phone hadn't stopped ringing since the Good Morning America interview aired at noon. The interview had been simple but powerful. Jessica Chen had asked straightforward questions about why I'd chosen to spend Christmas with homeless individuals instead of family, and I'd given honest answers. "Mr. Whitman, this couldn't have been an easy decision. What made you choose to open your home to strangers on Christmas Eve?" "Jessica, they weren't strangers by the end of the evening. They were neighbors, friends, family members I just hadn't met yet. And honestly, they appreciated the celebration in ways I'd forgotten." "We're possible. Can you tell us about some of your guests?" Robert Chen is a Vietnam veteran with 3 Purple Hearts who's been living in his van. But last night he stood at attention during grace with more dignity than most people show in boardrooms. Tommy Martinez is an Iraq veteran who played Christmas carols on his guitar and led us in singing. Maria Santos is raising 2 beautiful children as a single mother, and those kids wrote thank you notes after dinner without being asked. What message do you hope people take from your Christmas celebration? That Christmas isn't about impressing people with what you can afford. It's about recognizing the worth in every human being and celebrating that worth together. The interview had run for 6 minutes on national television, but those 6 minutes had apparently struck a nerve with viewers across the country. Janet Holbrook arrived at 2:30 p.m. with more documentation than I'd expected. Not just the photos from last night, but screenshots of social media responses to the news coverage. "Christian, look at this," she said, spreading printouts across my kitchen table. "The Hartford Courant's Facebook post has been shared over 15,000 times. The comments are incredible." She was right. Comment after comment from people sharing their own stories of loneliness during the holidays, praising the example I'd set, questioning how often we overlook people who need simple human kindness. But more than that, people were taking action. The Riverside Homeless Shelter had received over $30,000 in donations since the morning news coverage. 3 local restaurants had volunteered to provide weekly meals. A dozen families had called offering to host similar dinners throughout the year. "Mr. Whitman," Janet said, her voice soft with emotion, "you didn't just give those people Christmas dinner. You started a movement." At 3:15 p.m., my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus standing on my front porch, alone, his face a careful mask of controlled anger. "Mr. Whitman, we need to talk." I invited him in, noting how he glanced around the house as if seeing it for the first time. The dining room still showed evidence of last night's celebration. Extra chairs stacked against the wall. The good china still drying in the dish rack. "You've put us in an impossible position," he said without preamble. "Jennifer's been fielding calls all day from people who want to know why we weren't at your dinner. My business partners are questioning My family values. This is affecting my professional reputation. Marcus, sit down. Let me get you some coffee. I don't want coffee. I want you to understand what you've done. I poured myself a cup and sat across from him at the kitchen table. What exactly have I done? You've made us look like monsters. People are calling us the children who abandoned their father on Christmas. Do you have any idea how that affects our social standing, our business relationships? Are you the children who abandoned their father on Christmas? His jaw tightened. We invited you to join us the day after. We explained that this year's celebration was important for networking. Marcus, stop, just stop. I set down my coffee cup and looked directly at him. Do you want to know what I think happened here? What? I think you and Jennifer got so caught up in climbing the social ladder that you forgot what you were climbing toward. You wanted to impress people who don't actually care about you, and you were willing to sacrifice people who do care about you to make that happen. That's not... You spent my money to throw a party designed to prove you were successful enough to exclude your own father. You used the Christmas family fund, money I set aside to bring the family together, to create an event specifically designed to keep family apart. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The fund was for Christmas celebration. We celebrated Christmas. You celebrated networking opportunities. There's a difference. Mr. Whitman, you have to understand our position. Rebecca's parents, the Hendersons, these are important connections. Your stories about the military, your political opinions, your way of seeing things. It doesn't align with the image we're trying to project. There it was. The truth, finally stated clearly. I was an embarrassment to the image they wanted to project. Marcus, let me ask you something. When you married Jennifer, what did you think you were marrying into? A good family, a stable family with strong values. And now? Now I see that family dynamics are more complicated than I initially understood. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Family dynamics, is that what we're calling it when you exclude the patriarch from Christmas dinner? Look, maybe we handled this poorly. Maybe we could have been more diplomatic about the guest list situation. But what you did last night, turning this into a media event, making us look bad publicly, that's not how family resolves disagreements. Marcus, I didn't call the media. I had Christmas dinner with people who appreciated the invitation. The fact that it became news says more about how rare genuine kindness has become than it does about my motivations. So what happens now? Are you going to keep talking to reporters? Are you going to keep making us look like villains? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the news van still parked on my street. Somewhere across town, my children were dealing with the social consequences of their choices. Phone calls from friends asking uncomfortable questions, business associates wondering about their character, country club members questioning their values. Marcus, I'm going to tell you exactly what happens now. You and Jennifer and David and Rebecca are going to learn that actions have consequences. You're going to discover that reputation is built on character, not connections. And you're going to figure out whether family means something more to you than social advancement. And if we want to make this right, if we want to repair the relationship, I turn back to face him. That depends on whether you understand what making this right actually means. What do you mean? I mean that apologizing isn't the same as changing. Saying you're sorry isn't the same as understanding what you're sorry for. If you want to repair this relationship, you need to prove that you've learned something from this experience. How do we prove that? I walked to the kitchen counter where Janet had left copies of the newspaper coverage from this morning. Photos of last night's dinner, quotes from guests about dignity and respect and genuine human connection. Marcus, 22 people spent Christmas Eve at this table, people who understood what it meant to be grateful for simple kindness, people who appreciated being treated with respect instead of taking it for granted. I handed him one of the photos, the one of Tommy Martinez playing guitar while the children sang along. If you want to repair this relationship, show me that you understand the difference between what happened at my table last night and what happened at yours. He studied the photo for a long moment. Mr. Whitman, I don't understand what you want from us. I want you to become the kind of people who would have been honored to be included in last night's celebration, instead of embarrassed by association with it. At 4:30 p.m., Marcus left without commitment, but with considerably more to think about than when he'd arrived. And at 5 p.m., Father Santos called with news that would make this Christmas even more meaningful than I'd imagined. Christian, I've been getting calls all day from people who want to help. Not just donations, but people who want to volunteer for next Christmas Eve. Families who want to adopt this as an annual tradition. Father, that's wonderful, but Christian, they're not calling because they want charity tax deductions. They're calling because they saw what real Christmas looks like, and they want to be part of it. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my children's rejection had accidentally created something much larger than revenge or even personal redemption. It had reminded an entire community what the holidays were supposed to be about. But the most important lesson was still to come. December 26th brought consequences my children hadn't anticipated. While I was fielding interview requests from news outlets across New England, they were discovering that social media had turned them into cautionary tales about holiday priorities. The morning started with a call from David, and his voice carried a shakiness I hadn't heard since he was a child. Dad, we need to talk, all of us, together. About what, son? About fixing this mess before it gets any worse. By 10 a.m., both my children and their spouses were sitting in my living room for the first time in months. But this wasn't a family reunion. It was a crisis management meeting. Their body language told the story. Rebecca perched on the edge of her chair like she was ready to flee. Marcus checking his phone constantly. Jennifer wringing her hands. And David looking like a man who'd aged years in the span of days. Dad, Jennifer began, we need your help. With what? With stopping this public relations nightmare we're dealing with. I poured myself coffee and sat in my recliner, the same chair where I'd spent Christmas Eve morning processing their rejection. Tell me about this public relations nightmare. David cleared his throat. It started yesterday afternoon. Rebecca's book club friends began calling with questions about why we weren't at your Christmas dinner, about what kind of people exclude family during the holidays. This morning, Rebecca added quietly, I went to my yoga class and the instructor asked if I was related to the Christian Whitman from the news story. When I said yes, the entire class went silent. Not supportive silent, judgment silent. Marcus looked up from his phone with obvious distress. 3 of my potential business partners have postponed meetings. They're not saying why, but the timing is suspicious. The Henderson deal, the one we had Christmas dinner for, they're reassessing their partnership criteria. And, I prompted. Jennifer's voice broke slightly. The country club membership committee wants to meet with us about our community, involvement and family values. Apparently there have been questions about our character. I set down my coffee cup and studied their faces. These were successful, ambitious people who'd built their identities around social acceptance and professional advancement. Now they were discovering that reputation could evaporate faster than it was built. So you want me to help you manage the consequences of excluding me from Christmas? We want you to help us explain that this was all a misunderstanding, David said desperately, that you chose to do the charity dinner instead of coming to our celebration, that we supported your decision. You want me to lie. We want you to frame this in a way that doesn't destroy our reputations. Marcus said bluntly. I leaned back in my chair and really looked at them. These people I'd raised, supported, loved unconditionally for decades. Even now, faced with the consequences of their choices, they were asking me to solve their problems, rather than taking responsibility for creating them. "Let me ask you something," I said quietly. "In all these conversations with concerned friends and business associates, has anyone asked you why I chose to spend Christmas with homeless people instead of my own family?" They exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Have any of you wondered about that yourselves?" "Dad," Jennifer said carefully, "we know you were hurt by our decision." "Stop, just stop." I stood up and walked to the mantel where photos of our family covered every inch of space. 40 years of Christmases, birthdays, graduations, weddings. Evidence of a family that had once loved each other more than they loved appearances. "Jennifer, do you remember Christmas 1995? You were 10, David was 13. I'd been laid off from the construction job in November, and money was so tight that Sarah and I weren't sure we could afford Christmas presents." "I remember," she said softly. "Do you remember what we did? We made gifts. You built me a bookshelf, and Mom sewed David a quilt. And do you remember how you felt Christmas morning?" Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. "It was one of the best Christmases we ever had, because it felt special, personal." "David, do you remember why it felt special?" My son nodded slowly. "Because everything was made just for us. Because you and Mom spent time creating things instead of just buying them." "That's right. And do you remember what I told you that Christmas morning?" "You said," David's voice caught, "you said that Christmas wasn't about impressing people with what you could afford. It was about showing people how much they mattered to you." I turned back to face them. "So I'm going to ask you again. When you made the decision to exclude me from Christmas, what were you showing me about how much I mattered to you?" The silence stretched until Rebecca broke it with a whisper. "We were showing you that you mattered less than our image. And when I chose to spend Christmas Eve with people who had nothing but who appreciated simple kindness, what was I showing you? That," Jennifer struggled with the words, "that we had become people who didn't appreciate what we had. Not just what you had," I corrected gently. "Who you had." Marcus set down his phone for the first time since arriving. "Mr. Whitman, I think I'm beginning to understand what you're saying, but I need to ask, is it too late? Is there a way to fix this?" I sat back down and looked at each of them carefully. "Marcus, that depends on what you mean by fix this. I mean, is there a way to repair our relationship, to become the kind of family that would include everyone in Christmas instead of excluding the person who made Christmas possible?" It was the first question any of them had asked that wasn't about managing their image or controlling the narrative. It was about actual change. "David, let me ask you something. After you made that phone call excluding me from Christmas, did you think about me at all that evening?" My son's face crumpled. "Honestly, no. I was too busy getting ready for what we thought was going to be the most important dinner of our lives. And, Jennifer, I convinced myself you'd be fine, that you'd understand, that maybe you'd even prefer a quiet evening at home." Her voice broke completely. "I never imagined you'd be sitting here alone, wondering where you went wrong as a father. Rebecca, I was so focused on impressing my parents and Marcus's business contacts that I never considered what it meant to exclude the person who'd made the dinner possible in the first place. Marcus, I saw you as an obstacle to the image. We wanted to project. I never saw you as a human being who might be hurt by our choices." For the first time since they'd arrived, I felt something other than disappointment. Not forgiveness yet, but the possibility of it. "Here's what I need you to understand," I said. "The people who came to my Christmas dinner weren't just grateful for the food. They were grateful to be treated with dignity, to be seen as worthy of celebration instead of toleration. I pulled out my phone and showed them one of Janet's photographs, the one of our entire group around the dinner table, faces bright with genuine joy. These people have lost homes, jobs, health, family members, but they haven't lost their capacity for gratitude or their understanding of what really matters. When Tommy Martinez played guitar for us, he wasn't performing, he was sharing his gift. When Robert Chen stood at attention during Grace, he wasn't showing off, he was honoring the moment. "Dad," David said quietly, "what do we need to do to become the kind of people who would be honored to be at that table?" "That's the right question, son." "Finally. So what's the answer?" I looked around the room one more time. At these people I loved despite their choices. At this house where we'd built 40 years of memories before they'd tried to erase me from them. The answer is that you need to prove you understand the difference between image and character, between networking and loving, between taking and giving. How do we prove that? By showing me that you've learned what Christmas is actually supposed to be about. As they left that afternoon, I could see something had shifted. Not fixed. Fixing would take much longer, but shifted. They were asking different questions, seeing different priorities. Whether they could sustain that change would determine whether we had a future as a family. But for the first time since that devastating phone call, I had hoped that my children might remember how to love something more than their own ambitions. The real test would come next Christmas. January brought something I hadn't expected. Real change. Not promises or apologies, but actual measurable action from my children that suggested they'd understood the lesson in ways that went deeper than social damage control. It started with David calling me on January 3rd, but not to ask for anything. "Dad, I need to tell you something. Rebecca and I have been volunteering at the Riverside Homeless Shelter every Saturday since New Year's Day." That's wonderful, son. What prompted that?" "Honestly, I couldn't stop thinking about what you said, about proving we understand the difference between image and character. So we figured we should start learning what character actually looks like." David's voice carried something I hadn't heard in years, humility mixed with genuine purpose. "How's it going?" "It's harder than I expected. Not the work. The work is fine, but facing people who've lost everything and realizing how much I've taken for granted. There's a guy there, Vietnam vet named Paul, who reminds me of you. He talks about his family the same way you used to talk about us. Used to? Before we stopped deserving it." The conversation lasted an hour, and for the first time in years, David wasn't asking me to solve a problem or fund a dream. He was just talking to his father like a son who'd remembered what that relationship was supposed to mean. Jennifer's transformation was even more dramatic. She called on January 8th with news that stunned me. "Dad, I resigned from the country club membership committee." "Why?" "Because I realized I was spending more time worrying about who belonged in their exclusive circle than I was thinking about who I was excluding from mine." The irony wasn't lost on me. But Jennifer hadn't just resigned. She'd joined the board of the local food bank and was organizing a monthly community dinner program. Not a charity event for tax deductions, but a regular gathering where people could share meals regardless of their housing situation or economic status. "I want to create something like what you created Christmas Eve," she explained. "But not just once a year. I want to prove that I learned something from watching you choose love over bitterness." Even Marcus had begun to surprise me. His business partnership with the Hendersons had indeed fallen through, but instead of blaming me for the lost opportunity, he'd used the experience to evaluate what kind of success he actually wanted. "Mr. Whitman," he told me during a visit, in late January, "losing that deal was the best thing that could have happened to my career. I was so focused on impressing people who didn't care about my values that I'd forgotten I had values." Marcus had started a new consulting practice focused on helping small businesses instead of courting major corporations. His client list included 3 veteran-owned companies and a non-profit that provided job training for people transitioning out of homelessness. "I'm making less money," he admitted, "but I'm sleeping better at night." But it was Rebecca's change that moved me most deeply. She'd driven to my house on February 14th, Valentine's Day, with an unusual request. "Mr. Whitman, I owe you an apology that's bigger than words can cover, but I'd like to try anyway." She sat in my kitchen for 2 hours, explaining how she'd grown up in a family where worth was measured by social position, where love was conditional on achievement, where Christmas dinner was a performance rather than a celebration. "I brought those values into your family," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I convinced David that you were embarrassing because I was embarrassed by anything that didn't fit my narrow definition of success. I turned your son against his own father because I was too shallow to recognize character when I saw it." "Rebecca, please, let me finish. I want to ask if you'd consider letting me volunteer at your next community dinner. Not because I want to look good or feel better about myself, but because I want to learn how to be the kind of person who deserves to be part of a family like this." By March, something remarkable had happened. My children hadn't just apologized for excluding me from Christmas. They'd become people who would never make that choice again. They'd learned the difference between networking and loving, between image and character, between taking and giving. But the most significant change came in late March, when Jennifer called with a proposal that took my breath away. "Dad, we've been talking, all of us, and we want to ask you something. Will you let us help you host next Christmas Eve? Not as guests, but as family members who understand what that celebration is really about." "What do you mean?" "We want to expand it. Instead of 22 people, we want to invite 50. We want to create a Christmas Eve celebration that becomes an annual tradition this community can count on. A celebration where everyone is welcome, everyone is dignified, everyone is family." I sat in silence for a long moment, thinking about the journey that had brought us to this conversation. 11 months ago, they'd excluded me from Christmas because I didn't fit their image. Now they wanted to join me in creating something that valued character over status, love over appearances. "Jennifer, that sounds beautiful, but I need to know." "Nah, are you sure you understand what you're signing up for? This isn't a charity event. This isn't a networking opportunity. This is a commitment to treating every human being with dignity, regardless of their circumstances." "Dad, we understand. We've learned. We want to prove that we've become the kind of people who deserve to be part of something this meaningful. And your friends, the country club crowd, the business associates who judge based on appearances." Jennifer laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in years. "Dad, if they have a problem with us celebrating Christmas with homeless veterans and struggling families, then they're not the kind of people we want to impress anyway." As I hung up the phone, I felt Sarah's presence more strongly than I had since her death. I could almost hear her voice, the words she'd whispered during that final Christmas. "When you give people everything they want, they stop wanting anything except more." But sometimes, I realized, when you stop giving people everything they want, they remember how to want things that actually matter. My children had lost their perfect social Christmas, their networking opportunity, their carefully curated image of success. But in losing those things, they'd found something infinitely more valuable, the capacity to love without conditions, to give without calculating returns, to choose character over convenience. The Christmas that was supposed to destroy our family had actually saved it. But the most beautiful part was still to come. Christmas Eve 2024, exactly 1 year after my children told me I wasn't welcome at their table. But this year, everything was different. My dining room, living room, and kitchen had been transformed to accommodate 68 guests. Not 22 homeless individuals receiving charity, but 68 neighbors sharing Christmas dinner as equals. Veterans and business owners, sitting side by side, single mothers and retired teachers laughing together, children from struggling families playing with children from affluent ones, all of them simply children celebrating Christmas together. David and Rebecca had arrived at 10 a.m. to help with setup, their hands dirty from arranging tables, their faces bright with purpose instead of anxiety. Jennifer and Marcus had spent the morning picking up guests who needed transportation, treating each person like visiting royalty rather than charity cases. "Dad," David said as we surveyed the transformed space, "I need you to know something. This is the first Christmas in years where I'm not worried about impressing anyone. I'm just grateful to be here." At 6 p.m., as grace was being said over tables that stretched through 3 rooms, I looked around at faces that told the story of what Christmas could be when it was about love instead of status. Tommy Martinez was there again, but this year he wasn't homeless. The job training program Marcus had connected him with had led to full-time employment and an apartment. He still brought his guitar, but now he also brought his girlfriend Maria, yes, the same Maria Santos who'd attended with her children the year before. Robert Chen sat at the head table, his military posture as perfect as ever. But this year, he was wearing his own suit, purchased with money from the construction job I'd helped him get through my old business connections. He'd moved out of his van and into a small apartment, and his eyes held the light of a man who'd remembered his own worth. Bill Patterson, the retired teacher, was reading Christmas stories to the children again. But this year, he was reading, from his own published book, a collection of Christmas tales that had been picked up by a small press after the story of our dinner went viral. At 7:30 p.m., as dessert was being served, Jennifer stood up and asked for attention. "If I could have everyone's attention for just a moment," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the rooms. "I want to say something to the man who taught us all what Christmas really means." She looked directly at me, her eyes bright with tears. A year ago, my father was excluded from his own family's Christmas celebration because we thought he didn't fit the image we wanted to project. We were wrong about a lot of things that night, but we were most wrong about who he really was. The room had gone completely quiet. My father isn't just the man who built a successful business or the veteran who served his country with honor. He's the man who showed us that dignity isn't something you earn, it's something you give. He's the man who taught us that family isn't about blood or obligation. It's about choosing to love people and show up for them when it matters. She paused, looking around the room at faces that represented every economic level, every background, every circumstance. Everyone in this room tonight has a place at this table not because of what they can contribute, but because they're human beings who deserve to be celebrated. That's the lesson my father taught us, not through words, but through action. Not through charity, but through love. The applause that followed wasn't polite social convention. It was the sound of people who understood they were witnessing something rare, genuine transformation. But Jennifer wasn't finished. "Dad, we have something for you. Not a gift you can unwrap, but something we hope will last much longer than any." In present, David stood up and handed me an official-looking document. "Dad, we've established the Sarah Whitman Christmas Foundation, named after Mom, because we know she'd be proud of what this celebration has become. The foundation will ensure that this dinner happens every year, with funding and volunteers and coordination, so that no one in our community has to spend Christmas alone." I opened the document with hands that trembled slightly. The foundation was fully funded, with my children as board members and Tommy Martinez, Robert Chen, and Maria Santos as community liaisons. "But more than that," Marcus added, "we've committed to hosting monthly community dinners throughout the year, because We learned that Christmas spirit shouldn't be limited to one night. As I looked around the room, at faces bright with joy, at children laughing together regardless of their family's circumstances, at adults sharing stories and forming genuine friendships, I realized that the rejection that had broken my heart had actually become the catalyst for something beautiful beyond my imagination. My children hadn't just apologized for excluding me. They'd become people who would never exclude anyone. At 9 p.m., as guests were beginning to leave with full stomachs and fuller hearts, I found myself in the kitchen with Sarah's photo, which I'd moved there for the evening. "We did it, sweetheart," I whispered to her image. "We kept the family together, just not the way I expected. The family I'd kept together wasn't just David and Jennifer. It was this entire community of people who'd learned to see past circumstances to character, past status to soul." Tommy Martinez approached as I was saying goodbye to the last guests. "Mr. Whitman, I need to tell you something. This celebration changed my life, but not in the way you might think." "How so?" "It didn't give me a house or a job or a girlfriend. It gave me back my belief that I was worth celebrating. That feeling, that knowledge that I mattered to someone, that's what everything else was built on." As the final guests departed and my children helped with cleanup, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this moment. 11 months ago, I'd been a bitter man planning revenge against ungrateful children. Tonight, I was a grandfather, surrounded by people who understood that the best revenge against hatred is love, against exclusion is inclusion, against selfishness is service. "Dad," David said as we finished putting away the last dishes, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. When we excluded you from Christmas last year, did you plan all of this? Did you know it would lead to tonight?" I thought about that question carefully. "Son, when you told me I wasn't welcome at Christmas, I was planning to spend the evening feeling sorry for myself. The dinner with homeless guests happened because I realized I had a choice. I could focus on what I'd lost, or I could focus on what I could give, and you chose to give. I chose to love people who needed to know they were worth loving. Everything else, your transformation, this foundation, tonight's celebration, that happened because love has a way of multiplying when you give it away instead of hoarding it." Jennifer hugged me before leaving, and it was the first hug in years that felt completely genuine. "Dad, I need you to know something. Last Christmas when we excluded you, we thought we were protecting our image, but we were actually destroying our souls. Thank you for showing us the way back." As I locked the door behind them and turned off the lights, I felt Sarah's presence more strongly than I had since her death. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet. Not the emptiness of abandonment, but the stillness of completion. I'd spent decades building a financial legacy for my children, but in the end, the legacy that mattered was the one we'd built together. The knowledge that every human being deserves dignity, that family is defined by love rather than biology, and that Christmas is about celebrating the worth in every person we encounter. The Christmas that was supposed to be my humiliation had become my redemption. The rejection that was supposed to break me had actually freed me to become the man Sarah always knew I could be. And you know what? I wouldn't change a single moment of it. And you? Would you have had the strength to turn rejection into love, exclusion into inclusion, bitterness into blessing? I want to know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to hear that dignity always triumphs over pride and that love always wins in the end. Click the box on the right to watch our next story. And remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the chance to become better than they ever thought possible. Thank you for listening, and may your own Christmas table always have room for one more.